Recorded on 9/11/2023, Lexington, Kentucky, by Corey. A reading of Christianity and the Survival of Creation, an essay by Wendell Berry. I want to begin with a problem, namely that the culpability of Christianity in the destruction of the natural world and the uselessness of Christianity in any effort to correct that destruction are now established cliches of the conservative movement. This is a problem for two reasons. First, the indictment of Christianity by the anti-Christian conservatist is in many respects just. For instance, the complicity of Christian priests, preachers, and missionaries in the cultural destruction and the economic exploitation of the primary peoples of the Western Hemisphere, as of traditional cultures around the world, is notorious. Throughout the 500 years since Columbus's first landfall in the Bahamas, the evangelist has walked beside the conqueror and the merchant, too often blandly assuming that their causes were the same. Christian organizations to this day remain largely indifferent to the rape and plunder of the world and of its traditional cultures. It is hardly too much to say that most Christian organizations are as happily indifferent to the ecological, cultural, and religious implications of industrial economics as are most industrial organizations. The certified Christian seems just as likely as anyone else to join the military-industrial conspiracy to murder creation. The conservationist indictment of Christianity is a problem. Second, because, however just it may be, it does not come from an adequate understanding of the Bible and the cultural traditions that descend from the Bible. The anti-Christian conservationists characteristically deal with the Bible by waving it off, and this dismissal conceals, as much dismissals are apt to do, an ignorance that invalidates it. The Bible is an inspired book written by human hands. As such, it is certainly subject to criticism, but the anti-Christian environmentalists have not mastered the first rule of the criticism of books. You have to read them before you criticize them. Our predicament now, I believe, requires us to learn to read and understand the Bible in the light of the present fact of creation. This would seem to be a requirement both for Christians and for everyone concerned, but it entails a long work of true criticism, that is, of careful and judicious study, not dismissal. It entails furthermore the making of very precise distinctions between biblical instruction and the behavior of those people supposed to have been biblically instructed. I cannot pretend, obviously, to have made so meticulous a study. Even if I were capable of it, I would not live long enough to do it. But I have attempted to read the Bible with these issues in mind, and I see some virtually catastrophic discrepancies between biblical instruction and Christian behavior. I don't mean disreputable Christian behavior either. The discrepancies I see are between biblical instruction and allegedly respectable Christian behavior. If because of these discrepancies Christianity were dismissible, there would, of course, be no problem. We could simply dismiss it, along with the 20 centuries of unsatisfactory history attached to it, and start setting things to rights. The problem emerges only when we ask, where then would we turn for instruction? We might, let us suppose, turn to another religion, a recourse that is sometimes suggested by the anti-Christian conservationist. Buddhism, for example, is certainly a religion that could guide us toward a right respect for the natural world, our fellow humans, and fellow creatures. I owe a considerable debt myself to Buddhism and Buddhists, but there are an enormous number of people, and I am one of them, whose native religion, for better or worse, is Christianity. We were born to it. We began to learn about it before we became conscious. It is, whatever we think of it, an intimate belonging of our being. It informs our consciousness, our language, and our dreams. We can turn away from it or against it, but that will only bind us tightly to a reduced version of it. A better possibility is that this, our native religion, should survive and renew itself so that it may become as largely and truly instructive as need be. On such a survival and renewal of the Christian religion may depend the survival of the creation that is its subject. Part 2. If we read the Bible, keeping in mind the desirability of those two survivals, of Christianity and the creation, we are apt to discover several things about which modern Christian organizations have kept remarkably quiet, or to which they have paid little attention. We will discover that we humans do not own the world, or any part of it. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. There is in our human law undeniably the concept of right of land ownership, but this, I think, is merely an expedient to safeguard the mutual belonging of people and places, without which there can be no lasting and conserving human communities. This right of human ownership is limited by mortality and by natural constraints on human attention and responsibility. It quickly becomes abusive when used to justify large accumulations of real estate, and perhaps for that reason such large accumulations are forbidden in the 25th chapter of Leviticus. In biblical terms, the landowner is the guest and the steward of God. The land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me. We will discover that God made not only the parts of creation that we humans understand and approve, but all of it. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And so we must credit God with the mocking of biting and stinging insects, poisonous serpents, weeds, poisonous weeds, dangerous beasts, and disease-causing microorganisms. That we may disapprove of these things does not mean that God is in error, or that he ceded some of the work of creation to Satan. It means that we are deficient in wholeness, harmony, and understanding. That is, we are fallen. We will discover that God found the world as he made it to be good, that he made it for his pleasure, and that he continues to love it and to find it worthy despite its reduction and corruption by us. People who quote John 3:16 as an easy formula for getting to heaven neglect to see the great difficulty implied in the statement that the advent of Christ was made possible by God's love for the world, not God's love for heaven or for the world as it might be, but for the world as it was and is. Belief in Christ is thus dependent on prior belief in the inherent goodness, the lovability of the world. We will discover that the creation is not in any sense independent of the Creator, the result of a primal creative act long over and done with, but is the continuous, constant participation of all creatures in the being of God. Elihu said to Job that if God gather unto himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh shall perish together. And Psalm 104 says, Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created. Creation is thus God's presence in creatures. The Greek Orthodox theologian Philip Sherrard has written that creation is nothing less than the manifestation of God's hidden being. This means that we and all other creatures live by a sanctity that is inexpressibly intimate, for to every creature the gift of life is a portion of the breath and spirit of God. As the poet George Herbert put it, Thou art in small things great, not small in any, for thou art infinite in one and all. We will discover that for these reasons our destruction of nature is not just bad stewardship or stupid economics, but a betrayal of family responsibility. It is the most horrid blasphemy. It is flinging God's gifts into his face, as if they were of no worth beyond that assigned to them by our destruction of them. To Dante, despising nature and her goodness was a violence against God. We have no entitlement from the Bible to exterminate or permanently destroy or hold in contempt anything on the earth or in the heavens above it or in the waters beneath it. We have the right to use the gifts of nature, but not to ruin or waste them. We have the right to use what we need, but no more, which is why the Bible forbids usury and great accumulation of property. The usurer, Dante said, condemns nature, for he puts his hope elsewhere. William Blake was biblically correct then when he said that everything that lives is holy, and Blake's commentator, Kathleen Rain, was correct both biblically and historically when she said that the sense of the holiness of life is the human norm. The Bible leaves no doubt at all about the sanctity of the act of world-making, or of the world that was made, or of the creaturely or bodily life in this world. We are holy creatures living among other holy creatures in a world that is holy. Some people know this, and some do not. Nobody, of course, knows it all the time. But what keeps it from being far better known than it is? Why is it apparently unknown to millions of professed students of the Bible? How can modern Christianity have so solemnly folded its hands while so much of the work of God was and is being destroyed? Part 3. Obviously, the sense of the holiness of life is not compatible with an exploitative economy. You cannot know that life is holy if you are content to live from economic practices that daily destroy life and diminish its possibility. And many, if not most, Christian organizations now appear to be perfectly at peace with the military-industrial economy and its scientific destruction of life. Surely, if we are to remain free, and if we are to remain true to our religious inheritance, we must maintain a separation between church and state. But if we are to maintain any sense or coherence or meaning in our lives, we cannot tolerate the present utter disconnection between religion and economy. By economy, I do not mean economics, which is the study of money-making, but rather the ways of human housekeeping, the ways by which the human household is situated and maintained within the household of nature. To be uninterested in economy is to be uninterested in the practice of religion. It is to be uninterested in culture and in character. Probably the most urgent question now faced by people who would adhere to the Bible is this: what sort of economy would be responsible to the holiness of life? What for Christians would be the economy, the practices, and the restraints of right livelihood? I do not believe that organized Christianity now has any idea. I think its idea of a Christian economy is no more or less than the industrial economy, which is an economy firmly founded on the 7 deadly sins and the breaking of all 10 of the 10 commandments. Obviously, if Christianity is going to survive as more than a respecter and comforter of profitable iniquities, then Christians, regardless of their organizations, are going to have to interest themselves in economy, which is to say in nature and in work. They are going to have to give workable answers to those who would say, we cannot live without this economy that is destroying us in our world, who see the murder of creation as the only way of life. The holiness of life is obscured to modern Christians also by the idea that the only holy place is the built church. This idea may be more taken for granted than taught. Nevertheless, Christians are encouraged from childhood to think of the church building as God's house, and most of them could think of their houses, or farms, or shops, or factories as holy places, only with great effort and embarrassment. It is understandably difficult for modern Americans to think of their dwellings and workplaces as holy, because most of these are in fact places of desecration, deeply involved in the ruin of creation. The idea of the exclusive holiness of church buildings is, of course, widely incompatible with the idea, which the churches also teach, that God is present in all places to hear prayers. It is incompatible with Scripture. The idea that a human artifact could contain or confine God was explicitly repudiated by Solomon in his prayer at the dedication of the temple. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee, how much less this house that I have builded. And these words of Solomon were remembered 1,000 years later by St. Paul, preaching at Athens. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said. Idolatry always reduces to the worship of something made with hands, something confined within the terms of human work and human comprehension. Thus Solomon and St. Paul both insisted on the largeness and the at-largeness of God, setting him free, so to speak, from ideas about him. He is not to be fenced in under human control like some domestic creature. He is the wildest being in existence. The presence of his spirit in us is our wildness, our oneness with the wilderness of creation. That is why subduing the things of nature to human purposes is so dangerous, and why it so often results in evil, in separation and desecration. It is why the poets of our tradition so often have given nature the role not only of mother or grandmother, but of the highest earthly teacher and judge, a figure of mystery and great power. Jesus' own specifications for his church have nothing at all to do with masonry and carpentry, but only with people. His church is where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name. The Bible gives exhaustive, and sometimes exhausting, attention to the organization of religion, the building and rebuilding of the temple, its furnishings, the orders, duties, paraphernalia of the priesthood, the orders of rituals and ceremonies, but that does not disguise the fact that the most significant religious events recounted in the Bible do not occur in temples made with hands. The most important religion in that book is an organized and sometimes profoundly disruptive organization. From Abraham to Jesus, the most important people are not priests but shepherds, soldiers, property owners, workers, housewives, kings and queens, men servants and maid servants, fishermen, prisoners, whores, even bureaucrats. The great visionary encounters did not take place in temples but in sheep pastures, in the desert, in the wilderness, on mountains, on the shores of rivers and the sea, in the middle of the sea, in prisons. And however strenuously the divine voice prescribed rites and observances, it just as strenuously repudiated them when they were taken to be religion. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hateth. They are a trouble unto me, and I am weary to bear them. And when you spread forth your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. When you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Wash you, make you clean, put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes, cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. Religion, according to this view, is less to be celebrated in rituals than practiced in the world. I don't think it is enough appreciated how much an outdoor book the Bible is. It is a hypaetherial book, such as Thoreau talked about, a book open to the sky. It is best read and understood outdoors, and the farther outdoors the better, or that has been my experience of it. Passages that within walls seem improbable or incredible, outdoors seem merely natural. This is because outdoors we are confronted everywhere with wonders. We see that the miraculous is not extraordinary, but the common mode of existence. It is our daily bread. Whoever really has considered the lilies of the field or the birds of the air and pondered the improbability of their existence in this warm world, within the cold and empty stellar distances, will hardly balk at the turning of water into wine, which was, after all, a very small miracle. We forget the greater and still continuing miracle, by which water with soul and sunlight is turned into grapes. It is clearly impossible to assign holiness exclusively to the built church without denying holiness to the rest of creation, which is then said to be secular. The world which God looked at and found entirely good, we find none too good to pollute entirely and destroy piecemeal. The church then becomes a kind of preserve of holiness, from which certified lovers of God assault and plunder the secular earth. Not only does this repudiate God's approval of his work, it refuses also to honor the Bible's explicit instruction to regard the works of creation as God's revelation of himself. The assignment of holiness exclusively to the built church is therefore logically accompanied by the assignation of revelation exclusively to the Bible. But Psalm 19 begins, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." The word of God has been revealed in facts from the moment of the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter in Genesis. Let there be light, and there was light. And St. Paul states the rule, the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Yet from this free, generous, and sensible view of things we come to the idolatry of the book, the idea that nothing is true that cannot be and has not been already written. The misuse of the Bible thus logically accompanies the abuse of nature. If you are going to destroy creatures without respect, you will want to reduce them materially. You will want to deny that there is spirit or truth in them, just as you will want to believe that the only holy creatures, the only creatures with souls are humans, or even only Christian humans. By denying spirit and truth to the non-human creation, Modern proponents of religion have legitimized a form of blasphemy, without which the nature and culture-destroying machinery of the industrial economy could not have been built. That is, they have legitimized bad work. Good human work honors God's work. Good work uses no thing without respect for what it is in itself and for its origin. It uses neither tool nor material that does not respect and that it does not love. It honors nature as a great mystery and power, as an indispensable teacher, and as the inescapable judge of all work of human hands. It does not disassociate laugh in work, or pleasure in work, or love in work, or usefulness in beauty. To work without pleasure or affection, to make a product that is not both useful and beautiful, is to dishonor God, nature, the thing that is made, and whomever it is made for. This is blasphemy, to make shoddy work of the work of God. But such blasphemy is not possible when the entire creation is understood as holy, and when the works of God are understood as embodying and thus revealing his Spirit. In the Bible we find none of the industrialist's contempt or hatred for nature. We find instead a poetry of awe and reverence and profound cherishing, as in these verses from Moses' valedictory blessing of the 12 tribes. And of Joseph he said, "Blessed of the Lord be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew, and for the deep that croucheth beneath, and for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon, and for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills, and for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for the good will of him that dwelt in the bush." Part 4. I have been talking, of course, about a dualism that manifests itself in several ways, as a cleavage, a radical discontinuity between creator and creature, spirit and matter, religion and nature, religion and economy, worship and work, and so on. This dualism, I think, is the most destructive disease that afflicts us. In its best known, its most dangerous, and perhaps its fundamental version, it is the dualism of body and soul. This is an issue as difficult as it is important, and so to deal with it we should start at the beginning. The crucial test is probably Genesis 2:7, which gives the process by which Adam was created. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. My mind, like most people's, has been deeply influenced by dualism, and I can see how dualistic minds deal with this verse. They conclude that the formula for man-making is man equals body plus soul, but that conclusion cannot be derived except by violence from Genesis 2:7, which is not dualistic. The formula given in Genesis 2:7 is not man equals body plus soul. The formula there is soul equals dust plus breath. According to this verse, God did not make a body and put a soul into it, like a letter in an envelope. He formed man out of dust. Then by breathing his breath into it, he made the dust live. The dust, formed as man and made to live, did not embody a soul, it became a soul. Soul here refers to the whole creature. Humanity is thus presented to us in Adam, not as a creature of two discrete parts temporarily glued together, but as a single mystery. We can see how easy it is to fall into the dualism of body and soul when talking about the inescapable worldly dualities of good and evil, or time and eternity. And we can see how easy it is when Jesus asks, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" To assume that he is condemning the world and appreciating the disembodied soul. But if we give to soul here the sense that it has in Genesis 2:7, we see that he is doing no such thing. He is warning that in pursuit of so-called material possessions, we can lose our understanding of ourselves as living souls. That is, as creatures of God, members of the holy community of creation, we can lose the possibility of the atonement of that membership, for we are free if we choose to make a duality of our one living soul by disowning the breath of God that is our fundamental bond with one another and with other creatures. But we can make the same duality by disowning the dust. The breath of God is only one of the divine gifts that make us living souls. The other is the dust. Most of our modern troubles come from our misunderstanding and misvaluation of this dust, forgetting that the dust too is a creature of the Creator. May, by sending forth of his Spirit, we have presumed to decide that the dust is low. We have presumed to say that we are made of two parts, a body and a soul, the body being low because made of dust, and the soul high. By thus valuing these two supposed to be parts, we inevitably throw them into competition with each other, like two corporations. The spiritual view, of course, has been that the body, in Yeats's phrase, must be bruised to pleasure soul, and the secular version of the same dualism has been that the body, along with the rest of the material world, must give way before the advance of the human mind. The dominant religious view for a long time has been that the body is a kind of scrip issued by the great company store in the sky, which can be cashed in to redeem the soul, but is otherwise quite worthless. And the predictable result has been a human creature able to appreciate or tolerate only the spiritual or mental part of creation, in full of semi-conscious hatred of the physical or natural part, which it is ready and willing to destroy for salvation, for profit, for victory, or for fun. This madness constitutes the norm of modern humanity and of modern Christianity. But to despise the body or mistreat it for the sake of the soul is not just to burn one's house for the insurance, nor is it just self-hatred of the most deep and dangerous sort. It is yet another blasphemy. It is to make nothing, and worse than nothing, of the great something in which we live and move and have our being. When we hate and abuse the body and its earthly life and its joy for heaven's sake, what do we expect? That out of this life that we have presumed to despise and this world that we have presumed to destroy, we would somehow salvage a soul capable of eternal bliss? And what do we expect when with equal and opposite ingratitude we try to make of the finite body an infinite reservoir of dispirited and meaningless pleasures? Times may come, of course, when the life of the body must be denied or sacrificed. Times when the whole world must literally be lost for the sake of one's life as a living soul. But such sacrifice by people who truly respect and revere the life of the earth and its creator does not denounce or degrade the body, but rather exalts it and acknowledges its holiness. Such sacrifice is a refusal to allow the body to serve what is unworthy of it. Part 5. If we credit the Bible's description of the relationship between Creator and creation, then we cannot deny the spiritual importance of our economic life. Then we must see how religious issues lead to issues of economy, and how issues of economy lead to issues of art. By art, I mean all ways by which humans make things they need. If we understand that no artist, no maker can make except by reworking the works of creation, then we see that by our work we reveal what we think of the works of God. How we take our lives from this world, how we work, what work we do, how well we use the materials we use, and what we do with them after we use them, all these are questions of the highest and gravest religious significance. In answering them, we practice or do not practice our religion. The significance and ultimately the quality of the work we do is determined by our understanding of the story in which we are taking part. If we think of ourselves as merely biological creatures whose story is determined by genetics or environment or history or economics or technology, then, however pleasant or painful the part we play, it cannot matter much. Its significance is that of the mere self-concern. It is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, as Macbeth says when he has supped with horrors and is aweary of the sun. If we think of ourselves as lofty souls trapped temporarily in lowly bodies in a dispirited, desperate, unlovable world that we must despise for heaven's sake, then what have we done for this question of significance? If we divide reality into two parts, spiritual and material, and hold, as the Bible does not hold, that only the spiritual is good or desirable, then our relation to the material creation becomes arbitrary, having only the quantitative or mercenary value that we have, in fact, for this reason, assigned to it. Thus we become the judges and inevitably the destroyers of the world we do not make, and are bidden to understand as a divine gift. It is impossible to see how good work might be accomplished by people who think that our life in this world either signifies nothing or only has a negative significance. If, on the other hand, we believe that we are living souls, God's dust and God's breath, acting our parts among creatures all made of the same dust and breath as ourselves, and if we understand that we are free, within the obvious limits of mortal human life, to do evil or good to ourselves and to the other creatures, then all our acts have supreme significance. If it is true that we are living souls and morally free, then all of us are artists. All of us are makers within mortal terms and limits of our lives, of one's and others' lives, of things we need and use. This, Ananda Kuamaswami wrote, is the normal view, which assumes not that the artist is a special kind of man, but that every man who is not a mere idler or parasite is necessarily some kind of artist. But since even mere idlers and parasites may be said to work inescapably by proxy or influence, it might be better to say that everybody is an artist, either good or bad, responsible, irresponsible. Any life, by working or not working, by working well or poorly, inescapably changes other lives, and so changes the world. This is why our division of the fine arts from craftsmanship and craftsmanship from labor is so arbitrary, meaningless, and destructive. As Walter Schellring rightly said, both the plowman and the potter have a cosmic function, and bad art in any trade dishonors and damages creation. If we think of ourselves as living souls, immortal creatures, living in the midst of a creation that is mostly mysterious, and if we see that everything we make or do cannot help but have an everlasting significance for ourselves, for others, and for the world, then we see why some religious teachers have understood work as a form of prayer. We see why the old poets invoked the muse, and we know why George Herbert prayed in his poem Matins, "Teach me thy love to know, that this new light which now I see may both the work and workmen show." Work connects us both to creation and to eternity. This is the reason also for Mother Ann Lee's famous instruction: do all your work as though you had 1,000 years to live on earth, and as you would if you knew you must die tomorrow. Explaining the perfection, order, and illumination of the artistry of Shaker furniture makers, Kuamaswami wrote, "All tradition has seen in the master craftsman of the universe the exemplar of the human artist or maker by art, and we are told to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Searching out the lesson for us of the Shaker's humble and personal perfect artistry, which refused the modern divorce of utility and beauty, he wrote, "Unfortunately, we do not desire to be such as the Shaker was. We do not propose to work as though we had 1,000 years to live, as though we were to die tomorrow. Just as we desire peace, but not the things that make for peace, so we desire art, but not the things that make for art. We have the art that we deserve. If the sight of it puts us to shame, it is with ourselves that the reformation must begin. Any genuine effort to reform our arts, our ways of making, must take thought of the things that make for art. We must see that no art begins in itself. It begins in other arts and attitudes and ideas antecedent to any art and nature and its inspiration. If we look at the great artistic traditions, as it is necessary to do, we will see that they have never been divorced either from religion or from economy. The possibility of an entirely secular art and of works of art that are spiritless or ugly or useless is not a possibility that has been among us for a very long time. Traditionally, the arts have been ways of making that have played a just value on the materials or subjects, on the uses and the users of the things made by art, and on artists themselves. They have, that is, been ways of giving honor to the works of God. The great artistic traditions have had nothing to do with what we call self-expression. They have not been destructors of privacy and exploitive of private life. Though they have certainly originated things and employed genius, they have no affinity with the modern cults of originality and genius. Kuamaswami, a good guide as always, makes an indispensable distinction between genius in the modern sense and craftsmanship. Genius inhabits a world of its own. The master craftsman lives in a world inhabited by other men. He has neighbors. The arts traditionally belong to the neighborhood. They are the means by which the neighborhood lives, works, remembers, worships, and enjoys itself. But most important of all now is to see that the artistic traditions understood every art primarily as a skill or craft, and ultimately as a service to fellow creatures of God. An artist's first duty, according to this view, is technical. It is assumed that one will have talents, materials, subjects, perhaps even genius or inspiration or vision, but these are traditionally understood not as personal properties with which one may do as one chooses, but as gifts of God or nature that must be honored in use. One does not dare to use these things without the skill to use them well. As Dante said of his own art, far worse than in vain does he leave the shore who fishes for truth and has not the art. To use gifts less than well is to dishonor them in their giver. There is no material or subject in creation that in using we are excused from using well. There is no work in which we are excused from being able and responsible artist. Part 6. In denying the holiness of the body and of the so-called physical reality of the world, and in denying support to the good economy, the good work, by which alone the creation can receive due honor, modern Christianity generally has cut itself off from both nature and culture. It has no serious or competent interest in biology or ecology. It is equally an interest in the arts by which humankind connects itself to nature. It manifests no awareness of the specifically Christian cultural lineages that connect us to our past. There is, for example, a splendid heritage of Christian poetry in English that most church members live and die without reading or hearing about. Most sermons are preached without any awareness at all that the making of sermons is an art that has at times been magnificent. Most modern churches look like they were built by robots, without reference to the heritage of church architecture or respect for the place. They embody no awareness that work can be worship. Most religious music now attests to the general assumption that religion is no more than a vaguely pious and vaguely romantic emotion. Modern Christianity, then, has become as specialized in its organizations as other modern organizations, wholly concentrated on the industrial shibboleths of growth, counting its success in numbers, and on the very strange enterprise of saving the individual, isolated and disembodied soul. Having witnessed and abetted the dismemberment of the households, both human and natural, by which we have our bearing as creatures of God, as living souls, and having made light of the great feast and festival of creation to which we were bidden as living souls, the modern church presumes to be able to save the soul as an eternal piece of private property. It presumes, moreover, to save the souls of people in other countries and religious traditions who are often saner and more religious than we are. And always, the emphasis is on the individual soul. Some Christian spokespeople give the impression that the highest Christian bliss would be to get to heaven and find out that you are the only one there, that you are right and all the others wrong. Whatever its 20th century dress, modern Christianity, as I know it, is still at bottom the religion of Miss Watson, intent on a dull and superstitious rigmarole by which supposedly we can avoid going to the bad place and instead go to the good place. One can hardly help sympathizing with Huck Finn when he says, "I made up my mind I wouldn't try for it." Despite its protest to the contrary, modern Christianity has become willy-nilly in the religion of the state and the economic status quo. Because it has been so exclusively dedicated to incanting anemic souls into heaven, it has been made the tool of much earthly villainy. It has for the most part stood silently by while a predatory economy has ravaged the world, destroyed its natural beauty and health, divided and plundered its human communities and households. It has flown the flag and chanted the slogans of empire. It has assumed with the economists that economic forces automatically work for good, and has assumed with the industrialist and militarist that technology determines history. It has assumed with almost everybody that progress is good, that it is good to be modern and up with the times. It has admired Caesar and comforted him in his depredations and defaults. But in its de facto alliance with Caesar, Christianity connives directly in the murder of creation. For in these days Caesar is no longer a mere destroyer of armies, cities, and nations. He is a contradictor of the fundamental miracle of life. A part of the normal practice of his power is his willingness to destroy the world. He prays, he says, and churches everywhere compliantly pray with him. But he is praying to a God whose works he is prepared at any moment to destroy. What could be more wicked than that, more mad? The religion of the Bible, on the contrary, is a religion of the state and the status quo only in brief moments. In practice, it is religion for correction equally of people and of kings. In Christ's life, from the manger to the cross, was an affront to the established powers of his time, just as it is to the established powers of our own time. Much is made in churches of the good news of the Gospels. Less is said of the Gospel's bad news, which is that Jesus would have been horrified by just about what every Christian government the world has ever seen. He would be horrified by our government and its works, and would be horrified by him. Surely no sane and thoughtful person can imagine any government of our time sitting comfortably at the feet of Jesus while he is saying, "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you." In fact, we know that one of the businesses of governments, Christian or not, has been to reenact the crucifixion. It has happened again and again and again. In A Time for Trumpets, his history of the Battle of the Bulge, Charles B. MacDonald tells how the SS Colonel Joachim Piper was forced to withdraw from a bombarded chateau near the town of L'Église, leaving behind a number of severely wounded soldiers of both armies. Also left behind, MacDonald wrote, on a whitewashed wall of one of the rooms in the basement, was a charcoal drawing of Christ, thorns on his head, tears on his cheeks. Whether drawn by a German or American, nobody ever knew. This is not an image that belongs to history, but rather one that judges it. Some after commentary and thoughts. I'm reminded of St. Maximus, where he says that there are three thickenings of the Logos. The first is the manifestation of Logos in the flesh, which is Christ. The second is the manifestation of Logos in the Word, which is Scripture and tradition. And the third is the manifestation of Logos in creation itself, which is the natural world. One also has to ask, with Berry's point, is that where exactly did this view come from? The things he attacks Christianity for is something that for the most part is never found in paganism, and perhaps Berry would admit that this could only come about, or seems to have come about in either case, through Christianity. One has to, as a Christian, defend exactly why something they would hate so much as the destruction of the natural world and this philosophy of the world that seems ubiquitous in the modern world has come out as something that one would purport to be true. Of course, one could take a Luciferian principle that the closer to something of the truth it is, the harder it falls. A fallen pagan is not going to go around destroying the works of the gods, at least not in the way that industrialism can. But there is something to say that industrialism is uniquely produced by Christianity. One could trace this from the sort of rationalization that comes through scholasticism and Aquinas, the latent dualism in Augustine that is adapted in Protestantism, and perhaps most directly Descartes' understanding of God as a sort of mathematical equation to justify the I versus thou, or the I versus the environment, or the I versus the world mentality, that whether or not you've read or even heard of Descartes, no one before Descartes thought as, and everyone after Descartes basically does. One could say Descartes is not merely the father of modernity, but the father of industrialism. Technology does not exist in a vacuum. It is created based on philosophies and presuppositions that first must be discovered and made. The ideas, or the perversion of these forms, as Plato might say it, have to first be manifested in a mind, perhaps by a devil to a mind, but to a human mind nonetheless eventually, that then takes these forces and spreads them until an engineer or scientist gets a hold of them, whether or not they're conscious of it, and brings forth the technology that is based on those ideas. One gets this sense if you read, for example, the Book of Enoch and the Enochian literature, which would have it that virtually every technology came to us from the gods, and not the gods in any good sense, but the fallen gods, the Grigori, the Watcher Angels, the Nephilim, and so on. There's a sense in which all of this may be justified and a part of the plan of the divine creator, and so far the industrial world is what leads to a globalized world, and the globalized world is what would be required, probably, in order to birth the Antichrist, which requires an entire world worshipping him. That isn't to justify it, it's merely to say how it works in the divine economy. Nonetheless, as Christians, even if we accept that that is the case, I think it is, as Berry correctly points out, our responsibility as stewards of creation to take care of the earth and to oppose industrialism, actually, and modernity for the most part, in whatever way we're capable. For some that might be much bigger, and for some it's very small. Berry has written several essays on how to go about this in an everyday way, even if that means trying to grow as little as you can your own food at home, and to avoid being, how would I put it, a babe on the teat of the Gates-Fauci industrial machine. More and more, especially after COVID, people are waking up to the fact that pretty much every aspect of our lives is tied to an industrial complex that no part in human history could really compare to. We have created an entire system where we are hooked up and unable, as it were, to unhook ourselves from that system. We are permanently umbilically attached to a mother that is not natural or human, but corporate, as it were, something greater than the sum of its parts, something one could almost say not merely non-human, but demonic or otherworldly or alien. Other than that, I don't really have much to say right now. I think that one could draw a lot on Heidegger and Berry, as well as Fukuoka, though I don't think Berry ever read the former, although I know he read Fukuoka because he translated him, or helped his translations get published, rather. There's also a lot one could draw between Tolkien and his anti-industrialism throughout his works, and Berry. But I'm not really going to go into it. I'm just sort of suggesting it as possible research topics that would be interesting to read. Well, with nothing else, I'm going to depart.